Now on to our keynote speaker. I first met Governor Pawlenty back in 2004. I barely remember the event. I'm sure he barely remembers being here in Iowa. He was barnstorming across the state with a few other governors on behalf of then President Bush. It was a quick handshake for me, and he was off to another state that day. And I got a chance to see him again in 2007 when he was here and listened to him speak that time, and I really liked what I heard. I know you're thinking, Chad, you're a partisan. You probably share his worldview. You share his view of the world of politics, and that is true, but that's not what really intrigued me about him. What intrigued me was his personal story and where he had came from, and pulling yourself up from your bootstraps kind of story to make yourself into the person that you are. And I related to that story, and I think many of you here can relate to that story as well. And after reading his book, Courage to Stand, I've liked him even more. And we invited the governor to speak this evening because of that story, not because of his political views or his worldview. Tim's leadership style is rooted in his family. He's one of 5 children. He grew up near the stockyards of South St. Paul, Minnesota. His father was a union truck driver, and his mother, she tragically passed away at a young age. Tim worked while attending the University of Minnesota, working his way through school to be the first in his family to graduate college. He then went on to study law, earned his law degree, and became a criminal prosecutor. He was elected to the local city council in 1989 and then to the State House of Representatives 3 years later. In the State House, he quickly rose in the ranks and became the majority leader of his party. And he led efforts to enact the largest tax cuts in Minnesota's state history. And then after being elected governor in 2002, he kept his campaign promise and he balanced the budget every year without raising taxes. In fact, he cut taxes by $800 million, moving Minnesota out of the top 10 highest tax states in America, which was a goal of every governor for the previous 30 years. Now, during his 2 terms as governor, Governor Pawlenty used innovative and conservative leadership to balance the state's budget, cut spending, reform health care, and improve the schools, all without raising taxes. Minnesota now has nation-leading health care, the highest school tests, and what I know all of you would appreciate, a great leading economy. He's been married to his wife, Mary, for over 20 years. They have 2 daughters, Anna and Mara. Tim has ran the Twin Cities Marathon and is a fervent hockey fan. In fact, he plays in local pickup games. And his iPod, I've found out, includes Kenny Chesney, and maybe another reason why I liked him so well, one of my favorites, Bruce Springsteen's on there. I was impressed by his story and admire the governor a great deal. And I think after hearing him tonight, you too will be impressed by him and that story. And I want to encourage you after the event tonight to buy a book out in the hallway. He'll be taking some time to sign those. It'd make a great gift for a father or mother or brother or sister for that child that's going off to college or that child that's just finished college and going out in the real world. It'd be a great book. I encourage you to pick it up. And at this time, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty.
Well, good evening. It's a delight to be with you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I shouldn't admit this, but some years ago, even as a loyal Minnesotan, I took my family on vacation to Wisconsin. The girls were younger back then. We went over to the Wisconsin Dells, and I'm sure many of you have been there. They've got these great water slides, and of course it was early August. A heat wave had rolled through the upper Midwest. It was 100 degrees or so outside and high humidity. We packed up our stuff in the Wisconsin Dells and headed back to Minneapolis in my little Dodge Stratus, Mary and I in the front seat and the girls in the back. And those of you who've experienced long car rides with small children, you know how this story unfolds, right? About an hour into the ride, the girls are pulling each other's hair, they're elbowing each other in the ribs, they're throwing juice boxes at each other, and pretty soon the tempers in the car are about matching the temperatures outside. So I pull off on an exit ramp and get into a gas station, get the doors of the car open, and I'm pumping gas, kind of grinding my teeth and murmuring to myself about these misbehaving children. And I look over, and there's a guy pumping gas, right next to me. And he's kind of looking at me and looking at my car. I think he could sense there was some tension in my family. And our eyes kind of met at the gas pump. And he said, "I wish I had 2 kids." And I thought, "Pawlenty, you jerk. I mean, here you have these cherubs, these gifts from God, and this poor sap, he doesn't have any of this. And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm sorry, sir, you don't have kids? He said, no, I got 5 kids. I wish I had 2 kids. That's just a little story about putting things in context, which is what I want to talk to you about tonight. And let me just first start out by saying I want to thank this Chamber of Commerce and the people that are gathered here tonight, because you gather and you work throughout the year for something that is central to my remarks and the points I want to make with you tonight. And that is the work that you do as business leaders, as entrepreneurs, as community leaders, people who care about the well-being of this city. And then you come together and roll up your sleeves and work to make a positive difference is extraordinarily important. They've done all these fancy studies about economic development and where people decide to deploy capital and take risk and the like. And do you know that one of the most important determining factors about whether an area or a region is going to be successful in terms of business growth and economic development, you know what it is? The attitude and tempo and engagement of the community leaders, their spirit, their morale, their energy, their forward-leaning nature. And when you have somebody like Chad, when you have somebody like Kirk, and all of the rest of you in this room who say, it's worth my time to show up here on a Sunday night at a banquet, it's worth my time to show up at these endless breakfasts and other meetings that you have, it's worth my time to be an ambassador and celebrate a new business opening in this area, it matters a ton. Which gets me to my next point. I had 2 very concerning experiences in these last 10 days as I've moved around the country a little bit. One is to open up the newspaper not too many days ago and see an NBC Wall Street Journal poll. And the question, one of the questions in the poll was, which country do you think will be the dominant country in the world in 20 years? You know what the answer was? China. Now, this was not a poll of Chinese people. This was not a poll of people all across the world. It was a poll of citizens of the United States of America. So we have Americans, I think for the first time, a plurality of them saying their own country, our beloved United States of America, won't be the dominant country in the world within 20 years. That reflects a discouragement, a lack of confidence, a sense that things won't be as good in the future as they were in the past. They won't be as good for our children and our grandchildren as they have been for us. And for those of us who see that, for those of us who hear that, we have to make sure that we stand up and have the courage and the strength to say, we ain't buying that for a minute. That's a bunch of hogwash. This is the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. This is the United States of America. We are the American people. We can do anything if we put our mind to it, come together as a team, and push in the right direction. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So we have to understand, why is it that parts of Middle America economically feel challenged and feel concerned and feel like maybe they're just one job loss or one life challenge away from a cascade of bad things spiraling out of control for them? And so I want to address what I think needs to be basically common sense, bringing it back to government. I was in California a few days ago, and this is the other incident, meeting with some very successful people. They were in the 4th quarter of their career, but they said, Governor, if you're thinking about running or whatever you want to do, we may well help you. But as for our state, we've made our money, but we think trying to change our state is hopeless, and we give up. Now, these are some of the brightest, most entrepreneurial, most dynamic people in the country saying, we can't change it. Our government is so impervious to change and reform and accountability and dynamic qualities. You got really talented people say, we give up. That can't be the case in our country. We need to make sure that we encourage each other. This is the key part. Remember what made the country great It's not rocket science. There are basic values, basic principles, basic approaches that made us the best, most prosperous country in the world. We simply have to remind each other of what those are and apply them to the challenges and opportunities of our time. So what are they? And I won't go through them all, but let me give you a few examples. And the first one is right to the core of what you're about and why you gather and why you belong to this organization. The first one is this. Life's pretty tough if you don't have a job. So you got all these politicians running around the country saying, you know, I'm the jobs member of Congress, or I'm the jobs legislator, I'm the jobs this, I'm the jobs that. That's all great. But it's real tough to be pro-job and anti-business as a policymaker. That's like being pro-egg and anti-chicken. So when we want to ask and answer the question, what are those things that we can do to make it more likely, not less likely, that jobs are going to grow in this city, in this state, in my region, in our country, as we need to ask and answer that question precisely and strategically. It is one of the best things that we can do for our fellow citizens. If you ask them what matters to them, you know, after they speak about their faith and their families, they'll describe a series of other activities that bring them the most joy, or they have the most hope or the most worry about. It might include for some people just basic things like, can I afford to get a full tank of gas in my car? For others, they might be worried about whether they can get their kids to college. For others, they may be worried about whether they can pay for their health care, whether they'll even have health care. Others may want to get their basement finished. For some others, they may just have recreational things they like to do. Like, Governor, I like to go duck hunting in the fall with my buddies, or maybe they want to go see the Hawkeyes and the Gophers play, or who knows what their activities are. But if you look at all of those, they all involve one thing. You better have some money. And for most Iowans and most Minnesotans and most Americans, the pathway to being able to have a decent quality of life is having access to a decent job. And so we better be able to say to each other, we are going to ask and answer the question, what can we do to make it more likely jobs are going to grow if we're truly going to serve our fellow citizens? And when we answer that question and ask that question, we shouldn't go to the politicians. Most of them have actually never worked in the private sector in their life. We should go to the people like you who actually day in and day out provide the jobs, have the dreams, deploy the capital, take the risk, buy the capital equipment, build the buildings, meet the payroll, conduct the research, and hopefully commercialize it in our local areas and in our country. And when you ask people like you, what are the most important things we can do? One of the main answers that comes back is, Governor, or now former Governor, you got to keep our costs competitive. I talked to some of you in the room tonight, and you said basically the same thing. Look, there's a basket of costs, the cost of doing business in this city, in this county, in this state, in this region, in this country. It includes taxes. It includes workers' compensation insurance. It includes unemployment insurance compensation. It includes energy costs. It includes lawsuit costs. It includes permitting costs. It includes regulatory costs, and all of the stuff together that is the cost of doing business. And if that cost is too high and we price you out of the market, or we so discourage you with government burdens and regulations and forms and time and expense that you say it's no longer worth it, it's no longer profitable, you're taking away one more increment of my dynamic spirit, my American spirit, my entrepreneurial spirit, it's another instance of